My name is Ian Cosden. I know a number of you through USRC context, but today I'm going to wear my day job hat as the director for the Research Software Engineering for Computational and Data Science group. It's a long-winded way of saying I lead this Research Software Engineering group at Princeton. So I wanted to talk a bit about how we got to where we are, a background, some timeline, the evolution of the group, how it functions. And I've put this together with the target audience in mind of maybe new groups just getting started, folks who are interested in getting a group and having a case study perhaps to point to and say, this has been successful and this works. That said, I've got the quote down here, there's a right way, the wrong way, and the Princeton way. You know, this has worked for us. I realize there are a lot of things that make Princeton unique that have guided the reasons we've made some of these decisions, and we're very lucky to have certain resources at our disposal. That said, I think, at least I know at my institution, pointing at an example that already exists is a really powerful way to make an argument. So that's where I'm here. I think even if you're not in one of these positions, I hope you can maybe still get something out of it, or feedback to me if you see things that you're looking at this and say, I don't understand why this happened, or have you thought of this? I'd love that at the discussion. So our goal is to work with researchers directly to create efficient, scalable, and sustainable code in order to advance science, right? So our goal is advance the research forward, that being not doing our own independent research work. And we're embedded long-term. So by long-term, I mean from a few months to many years on a single project or multiple projects within a related domain. So we bring to it software development. I mentioned domain-specific knowledge for the reason that we do have these long-term partnerships. So we do develop or come in with domain-specific knowledge, and algorithm development, performance tuning, and in the end, coding standards, techniques, and best practices are something that we bring to the table. So I like this slide to say, what do I mean by a Princeton RC? So on the USRC side, we have this very inclusive definition. At Princeton, we need to get a little more fine-grained to say what it is that we exactly do. And this was really important as we were getting started and defining what exactly this was. So I like to say we're one part software engineer developer. That is, we're designing code, we're developing it, perhaps we're refactoring something that works, but it isn't really very robust. We're building test documentations, all the best practices. We're putting that in that maybe doesn't have a whole lot to do with the science itself. One part computational researcher scientist, that is, there's some domain expertise. We're reading the papers, we're speaking the same language as the researchers, we're spending the time to invest and understand the domain, implementing algorithms and code, and understanding that the goal here is to extract science from software and keeping that kind of researcher mindset as we work. And then equally kind of what we're not, and this was again important as we were getting set up, of we're not in this traditional research IT support, research facilitator, perhaps you might want to call it, where the goal would be to help novices get started, answer help tickets, solve problems like I can't get this to install, I'm getting this error message, I'm struggling with the scheduler, things like that, that I think is very important. Perhaps it's probably more important than an RSC at an institution getting started and getting people going, because you can have this very broad impact. But what we're going for is a narrower but very deep impact. So on the spectrum, we like to say somewhere along this horizontal line between professional software engineer and computational researcher scientist. Where we fall on this spectrum will depend on the project, the person, frankly, even the day. Some days it gets very computational research. Some days it's kind of pure software engineering that is very different. So a bit of history. In 2015, this group didn't exist. And because a few key faculty were saying something along the lines of, look, HPC architectures are changing so quickly, we can't keep up with our codes. We're scientists, we're not software engineers. We can't keep up with the pace that the national centers are changing, these emerging architectures. It would be really great if we had some in-house specialists to do this. So right, we were born out of HPC. It has evolved to much, much more since then, but the roots were in HPC and utilizing new hardware. So we got funding for 50% for a team of 5 specialists. I don't know what to call them, just get them. The idea here with this 50% was that there'd be some cost sharing. The provost had said, we're not going to give these people for free, show that the researchers have some skin in the game, that they want this and they're willing to put up some money, but we're gonna share some of the costs to enable this. And it was a permanent funding stream. So these could be long-term permanent positions. Right, this is kind of how Princeton works. If there's where there's faculty demand, funding shows up in some way, and that's how this got off the floor. How it was going to work, a bunch of question marks. We didn't know. I wish at the time something like USRC existed and we could leverage other things. A lot had to do actually with the UK group. They were really helpful. So how do we do this cost share? Who gets to work with these people, these specialists? What exactly will they do? What are they called? These were all questions that somebody had to answer. We had to figure it out kind of formally within the university. So there's a joint team, Princeton Research Computing. It made sense to house it here. It's a joint between the IT department, OIT, and the Princeton Institute for Computational Science and Engineering. So in 2016, we formally formed this group as an offshoot of the software and programming group to build out these specialists. I would say, so at the time, so when this first happened, there was a Princeton postdoc who was hired into one of these positions, and HR had come up with the title. This was before I got started. Please understand that. And it was a computational research application analyst was the name that they had come up with. And it didn't take long before I could convince them that using the acronym CRAP analyst was a bad idea. And that opened the door to being called the research software engineer. I have to give credit to the UK Association. As we were trying to come up with names, it became a really clear and obvious choice. This is exactly what we were trying to do. The name fits so well, and kind of the rest is history. But had that not group existed, I'm not sure. I don't think we'd still be at CRAP analyst, but we might not have settled on research software engineer, which has been an absolute blessing to the group to have this name to go around. So we still had some challenges. We still had to figure out how to hire and recruit RSCs. This was a term not really used in this country. So we had to figure out a switch from maybe listing job responsibilities to advertising how cool it would be to do this kind of work. We had to answer the questions of what is an RSC, how to do it. A question that came up a lot: can I do my own research, from folks coming from a research background, and is it a permanent position? So to answer some of these questions, remember we got this was going to be co-funded, and the idea here being that we needed to find a partner. And we're going to call them partners in this context. Could be an individual faculty member, a group of researchers, a whole academic department. There are a lot of centers at Princeton. There's lots of institutes at Princeton. It could be something at that level. These are sort of higher super department collaboration centers, institutes. And so we asked for a proposal, a commitment to co-fund these positions for 1 to 3 years. Notice it's not permanent, even though the positions were. We wanted to make this finite so that they would, remember, this was new to them. They didn't really know how this was going to work. And we'd say, try it out for 1 to 3 years, and you can renew it if it's successful. This gave them an opportunity not to have a permanent position on their books forever. If it was grant funded, this was obviously a win. And it's actually been really successful as a way of a proof of concept to get things going. So we had 3 steps: a letter of intent. Again, we didn't do this at first, and we realized very quickly that we needed to go meet with them and say, what are you trying to do? Help them craft the proposal, help them understand what exactly an RSE is and could do. Then they would write a proposal, not big, 3 pages of what they'd hope to get out of this and what RSE collaboration would look like, put together basically a senior faculty committee to review this as a good use of university funds based on scientific merit, impact, and the ability for concrete results. So we did 3 of these, and you can see word got out over time that this was a big thing and worthwhile. So we got more and more proposals each go around, and we haven't done a formal one of these since because we ran out of positions. So just to put it in a picture, the funding source that we use, so we've got this provostial allocation that comes through OIT, and the partner, we split it 50-50. We provide the management. They're formally housed within OIT research computing. And then what we said early on was, look, this is to supplement the research work. So we're going to work on projects about 85% of the time. We're not going to have any real research computing work. Instead, we want to keep some time to do professional development, collaboration, work with other RSCs, work on open source projects as a way to keep the saw sharp and continually learn. So this is how things started off. In 2017, as we ran out of these co-funded positions, we were approached by potential partners who said, I like this idea of a group. I like this idea of having an RSC. I have 100% of my funding. I'd like to be part of the group, even though there isn't this money. So we added the second funding model, which, excuse the cheesy pie charts, but essentially they're paying for everything, but it's the same deal. We said up front that if you're going to be part of this group, it's going to be the same way as everyone, and that your fully funded person has to participate in the group the same way. We'll provide some management for free. So the group, as I mentioned, has grown quite dramatically over the last almost 5 years to where we're up to now 13 with more on the way. It's just the appetite for RSCs is insatiable. To account for some of this, we reorged things a bit. We introduced a second level, a senior RSC with more responsibilities, both around mentoring and around actual software development. I think there's more to go. So we have these partners: neuroscience, high energy physics, machine learning, molecular biology, social sciences, genomics, some engineerings, and applied math. I wish I had time to get into kind of what it is that we do and the projects that we work on. Maybe at the highest level, we can think of improving performance, functionality. So adding new features. A researcher will say, I wish I had software that could do X, and we go build that. Reproducibility, a proof of concept that a postdoc wrote that they're the only person in the world who can get it to run, putting it into a reproducible pipeline. Usability, making things accessible to others, and improving reuse so that when someone leaves, it doesn't just rot. Shifting gears a bit to kind of building the team. How does a team operate? What does it look like functionally within the group? So we have this team, and I would say kind of the 3 biggest things that come out of having this team, and not just having them embedded permanently in a group, in a department that we never see, is we have a peer group, right? We have an ability to support each other. There's a resource that everyone has to share best practices, to learn from each other. This is a different role than a peer researcher. This does have a different set of skills needed, and so by having the peer group, we have a way to arrange that. But being close to the researchers is really important. So we have 2 desks. We have one that's embedded in the research group department, sits close to the researchers. It's down the hall. It fosters that collaboration really easily, but also a spot back with the rest of the RSC group. So it's now kind of settled on RSC Wednesday, where everybody descends into the building at the same time and kind of talk shop on the RSC side. We'd had multiple check-in stand-ups per week when we were all remote. We're still kind of halfway in between, so now it's kind of like people have 3 places. We've kept an occasional Zoom stand-up. We do a bi-weekly group meeting where someone gives a deep dive. So this is a half-hour to 45-minute. This is what I'm working on. This is how these are the problems that I've faced and solved, to share, but also give others an opportunity to provide some feedback about what could be different, or if they're having trouble. And at the end, we do this I'm struggling with X, Y, Z. Does anybody have a suggestion for this after that? So this is a 90-minute meeting that usually runs over. It's a long one. The feedback that I've gotten is, so we have the Slack workspace and channel that the ability to poke other RSCs is really valuable because we're not always in the same place all the time. New RSCs get a buddy, they go out to lunch, they connect as a way to just kind of make them feel like part of the group and connect and be more than just co-workers. And we do these project sprints and hackathons. So if someone has a particular task on a project that might lend itself well to some teamwork, grab a few, 2, 3 other RSCs and work together on this particular thing. And that moves around. So ideally everybody kind of gets what they give. So we have dedicated management, which I think is really successful. Granted, I'm absolutely justifying my own job here, but by having this a centralized team and not in what you hear time and time again, which is, I'm evaluated based on my publication or grants, but I'm really doing software, and that makes it challenging. We're very clear that that's not what we're trying to do. If that stuff comes out of it, that's kind of the end goal, and we want the researchers to be, we want to be enabling that, but that's not what the RSCs are evaluated on. This question comes up, so I feel like I should address it. We don't have a formal set of technical best practices. At this point, I think it's too hard and prescriptive and challenging because of domain. Part of what we do is we need to meet the domains where they are and what they're comfortable with, and being overly prescriptive, I think will only cause problems within the research groups, but we do a lot of sharing. We do a lot of sharing of best practices and suggestions and collaboration on what we should be doing as a group. And again, having this extra time to explore new technologies and collaborate on other projects has been really helpful for being a team. Again, why should we have a group and a dedicated management? It's a lot of work to hire RSCs, write the job descriptions, to deal with HR. This is a new career. They don't always get it. We need people to do technical interviews and make sure that we're hiring people who are well suited for the job. There's a lot of support that I think RSCs could benefit from. And I obviously don't have a lot of experience where we don't have this, but I can't imagine. The challenge is that if you don't have support for managing projects and interacting with researchers, someone who's focused on the professional development and learning new things in that field that maybe aren't immediately applicable to the project you're working on, we want to grow those competencies and because they come back, and this field really does change quite quickly. A lot of communication, not just with researchers about what RSCs and what they're doing and how things are going, but also with the administration. I don't ever think it's fair for the RSCs themselves to worry about what HR and the central administration is asking about in terms of the career and the role and the position and the classification and all those things. And so that's where we've made a lot of success. I mentioned this earlier, that having RSCs, having research software engineer as a name and a terminology, we've gone from specialists and ninjas and those programmers and Ian's group and all these things to now actually calling them research software engineers, which is huge, I think, both in terms of getting everyone on the same page to recognize this is a new role and classification, but also providing opportunities and visibility and maybe even getting to the point where people say that's something I want to be. I've heard about it. So one of the last things I want to talk about is some recent needs of the growth that we've gotten to, which is we're getting to the point of needing to formalize interactions. Chalk this up to something I wish I had done a bit earlier, of having a formal partnership guideline document with 2 main target audiences. So the first is current and future partners, so whether these be PIs, department chairs, or other kind of supervisory type people, to address FAQs, get asked the same questions all the time. How does this work? What does it do? all these things, but also to set expectations for this is what you can expect from an RSC, and this is what we expect from you. This is how we expect RSCs to be handled, treated, acknowledged, etc. And also for current future RSCs to explain again how it works and demonstrate that there's management institutional support for this role, and it's clearly articulated as to how this works. So it's online now, it's public. We made a point to make it public. This is what we've got in there. So we kind of define what an RSC is, what we're trying to do as a group, explain these different partnerships and fundings, again, expectations for time and commitment and work, how we do project intake, how we assign it, how we do management, all those things, expectations for the partner. This isn't a grad student. This isn't a postdoc. This is a professional with a long-term career, and this is how we expect this collaboration to work. And finally, specifically mentioning how we do publications and authorship of the expectation that, if this work could not be done without an RSE on that project, that we would expect them to be acknowledged as a co-author. So a lot of things have gone really well. We hear it all the time about how this is transforming research by combining these two things. I think it's gone really well that we're focused on software contributions and not research output. We can focus on doing things perhaps a bit slower, but do it right. Has some institutional knowledge. We're hearing again that, a project we worked on 4 years ago, somebody's come back with a really short question that they just simply don't know the answer to. And it's a couple emails, and I don't know what would have happened if, the RSE wasn't here and wasn't able to provide that kind of continued institutional knowledge. Something that we didn't really expect that we've gotten feedback from a lot was that RSCs are serving as mentors and leaders to researchers who are developing code. So, an early grad student who wants to do the right thing, but maybe doesn't know or know how to even approach it, by working with an RSC, they're raising the game of everyone around them. And finally, we do a lot of education and training workshops, mini courses, boot camps, things like that on campus. It's not all perfect. There are some challenges with the model, the bus factor. We don't have large RSE teams. When people leave, if something were to happen to someone, it will leave a big hole until we can replace them. It's a limitation of this really successful proof of concept prototype model. And as we grow, we have to figure out how to provide some redundancy and increase the bus factor. The funding is probably a challenge for everybody, right? The demand is outpacing the funding, and so how we handle that. The expansion has been so fast that that's pretty much all I can do to keep up with. Recruiting is still a challenge. Taking notes anytime. We hear about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how to write job descriptions and how to recruit. I mean, it's a challenge. Nicole's pointed me in lots of good directions already, and I'm really glad she's here and helping with those things. And finally, we've made a lot of progress in career path and classification. It's still strange that HR still struggles sometimes to understand about how we're not really a researcher, we're not really IT staff, we're somewhere in between, and how should they be graded, compensated, classified? What does a 30-year career in research software engineering look like at Princeton? And these are things I think we're making progress, but we haven't quite figured out yet. So to be determined. With that, I suspect I went way over my time as I usually do. Thanks for the opportunity to speak about this. You can reach out to me anytime you want to talk about these. Obviously, I'm on Slack all the time. You can ping me there if there's discussions that might be useful. I can go into more detail about any of these things. So with that, I'll stop and I'll go take a look at the actual chat.
Great, thank you, Ian. If anyone has questions, either you can put them into chat or unmute and ask if you'd like.
I do have a question in the chat. Great presentation, by the way. I'd be curious. So I personally love the idea of acknowledging RSCs as co-authors. For work without which it would not have been possible to publish in the first place, right? But I'd be curious, how's that done over at your institution?
I would say that 95% of the time, it doesn't even need to be said that researchers have been open and forthcoming and very willing to do this. They're right. I said 95, not 100%. So there are some where, this, as I said, some of this was reactive, not proactive of wanting to state it because of that reason. It's not always, and it comes out later. Like, why weren't we acknowledged? Like, why did you leave this person off?
I'm just curious because I've noticed, like, I think in some cases it's that RSCs might not feel comfortable asking or don't know exactly how to have that conversation. But I think it's a good idea to just put that forward in policy.
Yep, that's exactly what it was. We put it forward in policy so that it's upfront. They know it ahead of time, and it's clear the expectation. Obviously, we don't have a whole lot of recourse if the PI chooses not to do so. It's not. I think it's probably not a big enough offense that they're going to lose their RSE. But I mean, that's where we're getting to the level of administrative support and formality of, if you don't play by the rules, you won't get to continue to have an RSE. And again, it's overwhelmingly not an issue. But we're getting bigger now where we have to account for the challenges. And so we have formalized it. Right. Yeah, right. There's always that one too.
I have a question if I can jump in.
Yeah, of course.
First of all, thanks a lot for this. I'm super excited to hear about how you continue to build out the career path, especially for the RSC at Princeton. I think that'll certainly inform the whole industry of RSC in the US at least. But my question's around, does your group work on software development with the researchers coming to you? Like, are you both contributing to code? Or is your group doing the vast majority of the code contribution?
Obviously, it depends. I think if I had to say, most of it is in collaboration with, rather than more of a collaboration than a consultancy, where they're saying, can you please go build this? There's less of that. Some of that does exist. And I think it's valuable and we want to do that. But more often it's, all right, let's be part of the team. Let's whiteboard this together. We need to consider this aspect of the software, which is going to then influence, research decisions. Many are at, research group meetings and lab meetings, providing that level of engagement with the group. So it's a spectrum again. If I had to wildly guess, I'd say 75%, 25%. So 25% is kind of this, we're building it for you, whereas the rest is we're building it with you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that makes sense. So then a follow-on question is, how do you handle the, well, I guess for context, I'll add that make the assumption that for researchers, their motivation, their incentive is to get the data or do whatever it is that's research. And then for your group, my guess is that the motivation is to make some quality software that performs to some requirement, whether that's maintainability, high speed, any of that. And a big part of this is just well-written code, right? I mean, I think it's a part of the craft. So how do you navigate the competing interests there when you're working on the same code base together?
So this is where, I think there's, if I'm understanding correctly, there's a different pull, right? And so oftentimes we're pulling to go slower and do things right and maintain a standard, whereas they're trying to get the publication out, which I think we then have to go meet them halfway and say, we'll do more of this refactoring. We'll set up, the documentation. We'll write that. We're going to need your help. Like, you're going to need to be a point person here, but it's not going to need to be your focus. yes, it's going to take longer. You can go do something else while we work on this. We're not going to leave a project in a state that we're not proud of as a software product.
Okay. I see.
Again, though, but we're gonna like look at what are you using this for? Is this a package that you're going to distribute, or is this a data analysis tool that you just couldn't have written? And once it's published, it's kind of that's the end of its life. We're going to have different internal standards for those two different applications.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks.
I have a question about kind of your funding model and the logistics of how your group works. So it sounded like you work pretty long-term with a specific group or department rather than taking on a single project. Is that always the case? You always do these long-term projects where you're embedded with a specific group?
So as is always the case with everything, mostly yes, but not really. All right. So we have these long-term partnerships, and that defines like the scope of work that an RSC works on. In a few cases where these are at the departmental level, we will then have a sub kind of process for how to take on projects within that department. So let's use molecular biology as an example. We have an RSC who works with molecular biology. Every 9 months or so, we put out a call and say, who has a project that is in need of an RSC? We get a bunch of internal projects. We go and meet with them to kind of figure out scope. Does it jive with departmental priorities? These are smaller term projects. If they end up being longer, we go more than 9 months. It's fluid, but this is a way that we can do smaller projects that aren't embedded with a single group, but still have this continuity of domain expertise that has proven to be really valuable. So we do that in a few places, which there's more information if you go to that RC partnership guide, how we do some of these finer grained assignment of projects and take on new tasks. But it's still all defined up at a partnership level. So if somebody who's not a partner comes with a 3-week project, we don't have the capacity to take that right now, which is another major limitation of our model.
Thanks. I look forward to reading through that documentation a little more.
And please, if you have comments from like someone else in this field, please let me know. I'm very interested to hear what others might think, or if there's holes in it as we get more mature, to like the holes start poking out, right? People find them, and I have to try to get them proactively.
We just got charged to kind of reevaluate our model here. So this is very timely. And I might be contacting you to chat
Yeah,
about
please
it.
do. I'm happy to. So Vanessa, I'm trying to keep up with your comments, but I don't know if you have a question or if it's a discussion. And
it's more of a discussion. I can bring it up. Is there going to be like an official discussion time, or?
I think
This is
there
it.
can be.
Yeah, go for it.
There you go.
Yeah, so I guess I was thinking about these kinds of, I just thought about this. There's sort of different levels of working on software, different levels of support. So Ian, what you're talking about is sort of, and I don't mean to say like level 1, 2, 3, like one is better, or they're just different levels. Probably the level number is an indication of the closeness to the researchers. So level 1 is what you were talking about. It's you're sitting in a group that works directly with research groups, and it doesn't even matter whether it's sort of like a consultancy, like a service sort of thing, or you're like kind of collaborating with them, you're working closely with them and following their needs. Level 2, I would say, is being kind of generalist and working on software and tools that researchers badly need, but they won't explicitly ask for. So for example, container technologies, workflow, CI, it's like stuff that people use every day. And as a grad student, it's stuff that I took for granted, and I've never stopped to think about that like someone has to make it. Then I would say level 3 is working on innovating research software. So like it's a different definition of research software engineering, because you're like literally doing research on software. So it would be finding a better way to, do a model for a package manager or that sort of thing. So that I was kind of just thinking about these different levels, and how probably a lot of people in here, probably we all work on different levels. I think probably the majority works on a level that is directly helping the researchers. But, you know, personally speaking, I work on like, I guess before my current role, I was more of a generalist, and now I'm the third level. I'm trying to like model things. It's more research about research software. And the interesting question is like, do the people on these different levels, like, do we still feel part of this larger community? And because the definition, this is my later point, because the definition of RSE is so diverse, I think by way of that definition, we do.
So I think you bring up a great point, and I think I can hope that you're using your definitions of level 2 and level 3 are things that, as this profession becomes more mainstream, that funding agencies start to recognize the need for those levels and starts to provide an avenue by which people can sustain a career at those levels and aren't just being included as, you know, something necessary to do the other types of research work that I think, you know, a lot of what I'm talking about. I mean, I see. Good. I think you're about to come off of. I was going to go down one
no,
more
I was
path.
about to say that I think that's totally spot on. I think the only way that I've been able to do the work I'm doing now is because of being at a national lab. Looking back at when I was at Duke and when I was at Stanford, I don't see any of the kinds of work that I'm sort of alluding to being easy to get funding for there, because they'd have to be funded by way of a grant that comes from a department that is associated with a specific domain. And indeed, I think software sort of has happened that way. So like an example is SnakeMake, which is a workflow manager that came from Johannes Koser, and he works on like biology, and he needed it, so we built it, and it's a really cool tool now. But it's not like someone, you know, it's not like someone went out and they're like, oh, I want to work on this general model for a workflow manager. No grant and agency would fund that. And yeah, I agree that I hope in the future there'll be kind of more. I guess I'm a little bit skeptical that there'll be a lot of awareness for like working on some of like the lower level stuff. I feel like we're still very far away from that. Like, I'm not sure how many folks here I could be like, hey, let's make a binary analysis group for RSEs. Like, this is super cool. Like, it's a very niche thing that probably a lot of people don't want to dive into. But you know, I can't predict the future. I don't know. So it could be a thing. But I would say that if we can just get awareness for RSEs on that first level in terms of helping researchers like established, I think that would be a huge step, and maybe something will come after that.
So Andy has a question in the chat for you, Ian.
Yeah. Okay. I didn't want to jump in.
No, that's okay.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a great question, and one that I think maybe you have a different experience. It's a great question, but I don't think it's one that we have a lot of struggle with. So we tend to meet them where they are and make a change when we need to. So the question's around what happens if we have expertise in something that, or what happens if there's a language that the researchers are using that we don't have an expertise in. I think it's very important as RSEs that we understand why a researcher is using something and not come in and say, this is the right way to do it, so we're going to do it this way. Like that's a cultural mistake that's not going to gain us any friends and isn't going to advance research in the way we want to. So Vanessa's got you learn it, of course. And that's really honestly a lot of times what we do is we'll go in and we'll pick up what we need to in order to enable the work that they're trying to do. That said, there is a piece of, I see this in maybe, let's call it the less computationally, you know, historical domains, such as social sciences, where like they might know R and that's it. And R really isn't the right tool to use for the particular problem that they're trying to solve. We'll wrap it in R, right? And so we'll give them the tool in the language that they want, but we'll write it in C or C++ underneath so that it's performing and getting the job done as necessary. Like those types of solutions are things that we can bring. And I will say there's a piece where, and this is something that we gain over time with trust and respect of, we'll sit down and say like, we really believe that this is the right way to do it. and we'll have that discussion and make the decision together as a group with them, and not just present this is what we're going to do. So we need to have that dialogue.
One interesting discussion that it could be discussed later, but I was thinking about is just how simple the choice of language can actually influence how easy it is to collaborate, for example, with more industry-oriented communities. So a good example is the OCI Open Container Initiative. They maintain a bunch of standards, and because they're doing everything in the cloud, they use Go. And there was a discussion where, I brought up, well, I said, we're using Python because like this is a research group and that's what they're comfortable with. And there was just a lot of like blank faces, like not, and I kind of wonder like how, so the question I want to bring up for thinking about is how can we kind of bridge this gap of wanting to work on things that do have overlap between these very different communities, but when you actually are working on them, you just take fundamentally different approaches, whether that be an approach or a language or something else.
I don't need to be the one to answer this. Anyone else?
Yeah, it's just something to think about. It's something that I started to think about a little bit back.
Yeah, I really can't speak from a place of authority at all, but I will say just even as a researcher, I had to switch languages pretty frequently. And it's R and Python for many biologists. And you can almost pick out what kind of researcher in the biology world someone is by what language they use. Like the ecologists are staunch R users and will not consider any other language, near as I can tell. And I mean, that varies a little bit, but by and large, there's like people who really stick by a language. And I think we're starting to understand that they're tools, and that we'll have to learn a little bit of each thing. I haven't learned Go yet, but I have had to learn R and Python and switch between those for whatever packages are available, and to use whatever the community uses. So I wonder if there's like polyglot software packages out there that are doing something similar. I'm sure there are.
I would just want to add that, I think for RSCs, that continuous learning and improvement is sort of the name of the game here. That there's always going to be new languages and technologies and other things that are emerging. And it's really about, for a team, it's really about, well, how do we stay at the forefront of this, right? It's something that our team focuses on, for example. But I know that Vanessa also pointed out about the need for always learning to go. I think it's how it is.
I think, again, I kind of want to reiterate this with this researcher engagement. I think as we've grown that we realize that they respect our opinion. And so like we need to have that expertise and have that exposure to multiple different things so that we can go and say, we have a suggestion, why don't you consider this language or this tool, or this will benefit you for these reasons. And we know that because we've been continually learning and are exposed to more, and not expect them to be prepared to discover that on their own. I make a comment too. This too deep on a project is definitely a great idea. That is something that I wish I had the capacity to do, because I'm not even sure important ones. I'm almost saying all of them is a direction I would like to take the group in. For two minds are better than one, and someone leaves, so the expertise doesn't leave with them, and there's a lot of good reasons for that.
So to change the topic, if you're ready for it, I have a question about software testing.
Sure.
So the way that I would imagine an RSE, like if an RSE had been around when I was getting my master's or my PhD, they probably would have walked around, looked at the software and said, that's really great. Have you ever heard about an integration test? Let's write one. Okay, now let's refactor so we can do unit tests. Sweet, now that you've got testing, let's talk about CI. Okay, now that you've got some CI going, let's talk about CD and packaging. But I haven't heard you say anything about those things. Is that a part of what your RSEs do?
Let me ask, is that a part, meaning that conversation or those aspects?
More a matter of those aspects. I would kind of imagine an RSE to be like a testing evangelist going around and checking up on everyone. Have you written your tests today?
Right. And so there's two elements to this. One is they're often writing the tests, they're refactoring it, and they're introducing ideas like code coverage to the group, and they're helping when on a team with other developers, say grad students or postdocs. Those conversations are exactly actually what I didn't anticipate at the beginning. We've heard have been so big is that, you know, they're learning what CI is through the RSE who's built it, who's put it on, who set things up, and then showing the researchers how to take advantage of it. And they're going and doing it on a side project on their own because they've picked it up as a result of just the simple exposure. What is a bit dangerous that I would want to address is taking this to a level by which researchers feel it's not their code anymore and they don't even know how to approach it, right? So I think the way that you mentioned it, which is like doing this incrementally, is the right way to do it. Throwing them, I refactored it, I've got the whole thing set up in CI/CD, and it's all these tests, and I refactored the whole thing. Here's your code back. They look at it and go, I can't touch this, I don't understand what's happening, what did you do? And it just wasn't incremental enough of a change. That has happened before, and it is definitely something that we want to try not to do when we're collaborating on stuff we build. We have pretty, I don't want to say strict standards, but we expect it to be unit tested and set up with CI and CD, and then where appropriate, packaged appropriately.
Okay, thank you.
So maybe I'll add one more thing, and we're amongst friends. So something that we're just starting right now is the idea of a RSE repo review, which, you know, you come as a researcher and you have written code yourself, maybe you're getting ready for publication, and you kind of want some advice and someone to look over and say, what am I missing? It's got exactly what you had walked through of like, we'll step down one thing at a time and provide some suggestions and resources for how to do it, as a way to bring researchers up to speed and evangelize best practices.
Yeah, I mean, I think about that kind of stuff and how, as a master's student, and even in the computer science courses I took, no one really talked about testing. And now I see retractions from major journals, especially in biology, where they say, oh, Excel was doing something with this DNA sequence and interpreting it as a date instead of a string, and our results aren't valid anymore. And I just keep on thinking, like, there really should be tests to catch this. Like, everyone should be doing it, even if it's in a spreadsheet, like some sort of gut check that everything is going well. And so just kind of the building the practice and the thought that people should at least have of, I should double check this before I start making claims, is probably good for everyone.
Right. I think, broadly speaking, I think researchers fall into one of two camps that you're talking about, which is they want to do the right thing, but maybe they just haven't been exposed to it. It's not through negligence, it's just through inexperience and having someone or some expertise on campus, or I say on campus, but around them, who can either provide a training course, workshop, or give them an example to go on, is really effective at that. And then the other camp is, it's just a tool. I just want to get my research done. Like, I just want to make this as fast and quick and dirty as possible and move on. And I don't know how to win that group over. I think they're fewer, but they're there, and that's a harder sell.
I'm not entirely sure those are two separate camps, to be honest with you. I don't know if that's mutually exclusive. And you know, having been a researcher that's moved this direction, I can tell you, I'm not against projects that get the job done because, you know, the way that I judge whether my team is research facilitation. That's what we do. We work with RSEs and we work with cyber infrastructure professionals to deliver researchers unto the compute, right? And literally the way that I judge myself and whether we've done well is how much faster are people getting to doing research and doing things that are heroic, and like doing things that are in their eyes useful than they were last year. You know, have I sped up time to research, or, you know, lowered that barrier to research? And that's sometimes a difficult thing, but sometimes you can actually, like, things that took 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks now takes, you know, 2 or 3 hours because we can automate some of the things that are painful. I mean, the reason that I ever even turned to RSEs in the first place at Arizona was we had, you know, 1,100 active users. I had 3 people on staff, and we had to be clever. We had to automate. There was just no way to support the research community at the level we were with the staffing we had if we couldn't get rid of a lot of stuff. And we made some hacky stuff, I'll be honest, but it worked, you know. And will I be proud of that in 5 years? No. I'm not even sure if I'm proud of it now, but you know, we did help people and research got done faster and more efficiently. So I think that there's like growing maturity, perhaps, you know, and what I'm up to is just trying to raise the tides ever so slightly and lift all boats. And if I'm doing that, I can go home at the end of the day, and, you know, at least things are slightly better than they used to be. So I'm not sure if you have to win them over, but maybe you do. I'm not sure. That's just my kind of experience.